New York always carries that low hum that slips through the windows like a rumor in the pipes, a train biting the rail on the 4 line, a distant siren climbing up Lexington, the steady drone of buildings when the neighbor's air conditioner gives up on summer. If I close my eyes, I can map my life by that sound. I can trace the echo of who I was, and what I eventually became. No need to dramatize it. There are no violins. Only breathing. The metallic snore of the city and, somewhere in the middle of it all, me silent, trying to sort through a pain that first burned and then cooled, like coffee forgotten on the table. My name is Christopher Cox. In the professional world, I was known for things that now sound small: a well-behaved analyst, a decent man with a modest talent for numbers and no halo around him. A man who didn't get in the way during meetings. I lived with Grace in an apartment in Morningside Heights, with a partial view of the Hudson if you leaned out the bedroom window and counted the 3 wilted trees in the park. She once said that living there was like owning a cheap postcard framed behind fogged glass. Grace had the perfect words for disdain. And I had patience. And a slow kind of faith in the idea that there was an order to things. Not a fair order, just an order. What I'm about to tell happened 10 years ago. It was during one of those corporate conferences in Midtown, the kind that rent out vast hotel ballrooms that smell of overheated carpet, mediocre coffee, and badly calibrated LED panels. I think it was the Marriott Marquis, though memory tends to move places around like pawns that don't really matter. There were round tables, white tablecloths with invisible stains that appeared only when the light shifted, and those microphones that make every voice sound a little nasal. Grace looked flawless, as always, a deep blue dress, a luminous watch that seemed to measure emotional distance as well as time, and that way she had of claiming the center of a room without ever asking permission. I was beside her, the kind of presence that doesn't disturb because it doesn't shine. We were a couple. I repeat that because it sounds improbable now. We were a couple, and yet I was already a draft written in the margin of her life. That afternoon she went on stage with a panel of brokers and analysts. They talked about flows, about risks, about some new product words that look bright on paper but blur into warm fog in a conference hall. And then I saw him, Mike and Gwen, her ex. A Wall Street broker with the haircut of someone who knows there'll always be a chair waiting for him when the music stops. Micah had that smile carved patiently by years of applause. When he sat beside her, he adjusted his tie knot, and I knew something in me would end that night. The question that set it all in motion came from the moderator, a man with a pompous voice. What separates a successful operator from an average one? Grace smiled, slightly to the side, and before speaking, she found me with her eyes. It lasted a second. She knew my seconds. She said the average trader mistakes prudence for fear, that intuition isn't superstition, that taking a position isn't gambling, it's recognizing patterns others can't see. So far, nothing she hadn't said at home before. But then, deliberately, she made the comparison. She said that in her life she'd lived with someone who believed patience was an absolute virtue, someone who talked about process while the train went by. That Micah, and in that name she stretched an invisible string, never let a train pass. Christopher believes in waiting for the perfect train, she said. The moderator laughed. And then she added, the door's right there, for whoever keeps staring. A soft murmur rose, the sound people make when they applaud someone else's cleverness. It took me a moment to realize that the door she meant was mine. I didn't make a scene. I never learned how. I took my jacket from the back of the chair and walked toward the side aisle. As I passed them, Grace barely turned her head. Sometimes I think she expected me to give something back, a line, a gesture, anything. But my body chose silence. I crossed the lobby, nodded at a waiter carrying empty glasses, and stepped outside. Times Square still pulsed with that unnatural brightness, the kind that turns you into an insect. I felt a sticky wind rising from the subway grate. At the corner, 2 tourists argued over a map, and I thought about the map I'd used all this time to arrange my life, how it must have had a printing error. I walked aimlessly. Crossed 7th, then 6th. Went down the stairs of a station polished by countless shoes, and boarded a random train. I don't remember if it was the N or the Q. I only remember the bridge, the East River like a sorrowful mirror, the girders of the Manhattan Bridge drawing shadows across the cars, and a graffiti that read mourn in bold letters. I liked the honesty of that word. That night, when I came home, I knew it was no longer home. Grace arrived late, kicked off her heels with that sharp, habitual gesture, and simply said that what happened earlier had been didactic. I didn't argue. The discussion was short, clean, as if we were signing a paper without reading the fine print. The next day, I left with a suitcase, moved into a small studio in Long Island City, rented from a Russian man who stared at the ceiling a lot. The studio looked out on a courtyard of organized trash, stacked garbage bags, a rusted shopping cart, 2 bicycles without wheels. There was a table, an uncomfortable chair, and a rectangular window through which the lights of Queens arrived out of order. It was enough. If I said I knew what I was going to do from that moment on, I'd be lying. I didn't know. I just felt I couldn't stay still. I had just enough savings, a laptop that heated up like a radiator, and a quiet knack for data. I started working as a freelance consultant for small people chasing big things, e-commerce retailers dreaming of perfect metrics, restless developers trying to turn intuition into something sellable. And somehow, because pain also knows how to aim, I fell into the business I'd absorbed through osmosis, trading automation. I didn't want to be Micah. I didn't want to be Grace. I'm not even sure I wanted to beat them. What I wanted was to build something that didn't require anyone's permission for me to stay in the room. Those were long years, slow-cooked ones. I learned to hear the rhythm of the keyboard the way you hear a clock at 3 a.m. The neighborhood had its own music too, the trains clattering above Queens Boulevard, the snap of the 7 train doors when they jammed, the clack of skate wheels on asphalt at Hunter's Point. I bought secondhand statistics books at Strand and marked them in pencil. I read research papers at dawn with bitter coffee, and when insomnia got unbearable, I walked along the East River until I saw Manhattan's outline, a line drawn purely by stubbornness. I didn't write a grand theory. I did what I know, added pieces. An execution engine that learned from liquidity patterns. A news-reading module that filtered noise and converted it into sentiment, trained with old headlines from the Journal and the Times. A routing system that avoided the hours when the market behaved like an impulsive teenager. No magic. But sometimes patience, if it finds a decent home, can bloom. I called it Koji. It was an inside joke. When I was a kid, my mother used to say my stare went still, like a dog that understands more than it shows. Koji was the name I would have given that dog, a dog that doesn't bark, just waits, calculates, and bites when it has to. Koji wasn't a brilliant algorithm. It was a set of small, well-tied intelligences doing the kind of work I'd seen humans do while believing they were irreplaceable. I didn't want to destroy anything. I wanted to prove that even the sharpest talent has edges you can replicate once the pattern becomes clear. I registered an LLC, built a minimalist website with clean typography, and offered Koji as a discrete service. No absurd returns promised, just efficiency, less friction, fewer judgment errors. At first, nobody listened. Then a small firm in Brooklyn, people with more hunger than reputation, gave me 3 months. It was enough to tune things I hadn't seen from my desk. They gained order. I gained data. And the rumor, like everything worth something in New York, spread through cafes and hallway conversations. I heard from a friend that Grace had left her firm and partnered with Micah. A sharp little boutique with short-named clients and expensive signatures. They were doing well. I knew because one day I saw their faces again, huge on a Times Square screen, promoting a panel at the Javits Center. That giant image asked me the same question as before. What separates a successful operator from an average one? I didn't laugh. I just walked faster, because a light drizzle had started, the kind you can't see but that soaks you anyway, and the city blurred like a photograph printed with fading ink. Revenge is an animal that latches onto your ankle if you don't see it coming. I didn't call it that. I lied to myself a little. I said I just wanted to keep improving Koji, and if along the way I happened to take clients who used to raise an eyebrow at my name, well, that was just the market. But the market delivers justice differently. It doesn't punish with morals, it punishes with price. I released a reduced, freemium version of Koji for small teams. The paid tier wasn't cheap, but it was honest. And the free one, when used well, made enough noise at the base that big boutiques began noticing their order flows didn't move the way they used to. Automation seeped in drop by drop, through cracks no one had bothered to seal. And then, one blue-lit winter morning, I got an email from a nervous assistant. "We're interested in a private demo of Koji. Signed, Ongwin and Hart. Grace. Micah." I didn't feel fire. I felt precision, the quiet click you hear when you finally see the trick in an algebra problem. I replied politely. We set a date. I asked for it to be in their office, in the financial district. I wanted to see that house of mirrors from the inside. In the polished steel elevator, I checked my reflection in the door, trimmed hair, short beard, plain shirt. They greeted me with that scent of expensive flowers that offices use to hide the smell of people. Micah shook my hand with measured firmness. Grace, instead, just tilted her head without touching me. I could read, right there, everything they weren't going to say. The demo was flawless, mostly because I'd learned to speak less. Koji spoke for itself: slippage reduction metrics, a heat map of volatility by hour, a priority model that cut transaction costs without increasing risk. Micah asked about the fee structure, the update pipeline, latency. Grace, in that calm, expressionless tone, asked, "How many clients are already live?" I gave her a number, modest, but true. They liked that I didn't exaggerate. We agreed on a limited trial, 90 days, a specific set of assets, signed rules. No show, no photos. Just results. What came next doesn't need adjectives. The curve tilted upward in silence. They started routing part of their flow through Koji. I watched. The metrics improved. Reports came in clean. Their assistants sent emails with too many exclamation marks. Then came ambition. Micah wanted more integration, customization, to weave Koji into their entire decision chain. And that's when I realized the circle had closed without me naming it. Koji wasn't just doing its job, it was rewriting theirs. Micah's fabled instinct, that sixth sense he'd built his legend on, had nowhere left to shine. The system had learned to move before his impulse did. I saw it in his face, the discomfort of a man who, for the first time, doesn't know why he's in the room. The 90 days ended with a meeting that felt like the last scene of a play badly lit. In a glass room overlooking the Wall Street Bowl, Micah started talking about exclusivity. He wanted me to stop selling Koji to anyone in their league. He wanted me inside a cut of equity, a chair with a high back, my name on a brass plate. Grace said nothing. But the way she lifted her hand to bring the glass of water closer, that small, careful motion, brought back too many nights from before. The voice that came out of me was flat. No. I said Koji wasn't a suit made for one man. That we could, at best, discuss a custom package, but not exclusivity. Micah clenched his jaw, smiled politely. And then Grace, for the first time, looked at me the way you look at someone who no longer fits inside the story you wrote. "You're wasting an opportunity," she said. And I answered with something like, "I'm not waiting for trains anymore." It was the only concession to the metaphor. I walked down Broadway, all the way to Battery Park. The boats looked like toys pushed around by a spoiled child. I buttoned my coat. The gulls were hungry for imitation bread. I thought about the door, the one they'd pointed me to back then. And the ones you learn to open from the inside. The following months passed softly, like a carefully measured anesthesia. Koji grew. Clients came from Boston, from Chicago, from a San Francisco fund that spoke with a calm so perfect it felt like mockery. I started sleeping better. Still, I avoided certain places. The ballroom of the Marriott. The corridors of the Javits. Streets where memory could turn into an ambush. Until one day they called, inviting me to speak at a conference on automation and human nature in the market. The title made me smile. I asked for an early slot, one of those where half the audience shows up hungover and the other half just answers emails. They agreed. 2 weeks later, I learned who would headline the main afternoon panel, the one with lights, cameras, applause. Gwen and Hart. Destiny doesn't have that many tricks, it recycles. I didn't plan anything dramatic. I had my slides, clean charts, a short diagram of decision flow, statistics on human error in manual execution. I spoke, then stepped down. A coffee, a hallway, a few handshakes. From a distance, I saw Grace surrounded by that aura of aggressive efficiency. Micah beside her, like an actor arriving right on cue. I went for a break. Sometimes revenge dresses itself as coincidence, or so I like to believe. The climax you expect had no theatrics. It happened on the main stage, under lights that bleached faces, while the big screen displayed numbers the audience already knew how to applaud. Micah was presenting a new decision framework, which, to my weary eyes, was just a repackaged version of something Koji had already solved, something I knew they still used in private. He spoke with that old muscle of success. Grace nodded with tight lips. The moderator exaggerated his interest. And then Micah paused. He brought a hand to his chest, stumbled over the word liquid, and the word broke. I saw the crack as if in slow motion. A breath that doesn't arrive. A gesture folding inward. The color draining from his face. He leaned forward, trying to steady himself on the table. Someone in the front row stood up. A voice asked, "Are you okay?" And then, collective paralysis. I didn't move. Not out of indifference. Not out of cruelty. It was pure disbelief, childlike, almost innocent. The market brought down by the body of a man. The hero out of air. Help arrived fast. Conferences know what to do when performance turns into reality. They lowered him carefully, led him toward a hallway I knew too well. Grace stood frozen for a second, as if her script had lost pages. I took a step back. Didn't run. Didn't record. Didn't do anything that might go viral. I just breathed. And in that breath, I felt a truth that took me years to articulate. I wasn't witnessing justice. I was seeing the plain fragility of all things, mine included. Micah wasn't some cartoon villain. He was just a man with a heart that had decided it wanted attention. I didn't hear about his condition until that night, when a curt email from the conference organizers asked for discretion and wished him a speedy recovery. No one mentioned Koji, of course. No one mentioned anything. The city kept its noise going. I took the subway at 34th Street, Hudson Yards. Went down to that long, cool platform that always smells new, even though it isn't anymore. People stared at their screens, no one looked at anyone. I boarded the train. Counted the stations as if counting them meant something. Times Square. Bryant Park. Grand Central. I got off at 51st, out of habit. Walked to a deli, bought chicken soup and whole grain bread, and took a cab home, because when you're carrying something warm, you'd rather not ruin its temperature underground. That night, the lights of Queens flickered like they were signaling me. I thought of Grace. Not of her hardness, but of the silence that would soon come looking for her. Because some silences enter a home like cold air, noiseless, but with teeth. I fell asleep late and dreamed of a train that never arrived. When I woke, there was a message from her. 3 words. Can we talk? I didn't rush to reply. I made coffee. Washed the soup bowl twice, as if cleanliness were a ritual that could bring order to what refuses to be ordered. Then I wrote back. Yes. We met in a narrow cafe on 23rd, near the Flatiron. She wasn't wearing makeup, which, in her case, meant makeup so subtle you forget it's there. She looked lighter, or maybe just tired. There was no ring on her hand. The city reflected in the window like a watercolor left out in the rain. We sat. She said thank you. And then, nothing. I waited. Sometimes time does things if you let it. Finally, she said, Micah's stable. I nodded. He'll have to slow down. I nodded again. Koji works. I smiled faintly. I didn't come to ask for anything, she said at last. I came to understand what you've been doing all these years. I didn't talk about nights or statistics or the walks by the river counting streetlights. I talked about patience, that word she'd once used to slice me open in public. I talked about watching without resentment, though I didn't always manage it. About accepting that I'm not brilliant, not a genius, just a man who knows how to bring things into order. Her laugh sounded like glass brushing against glass, almost inaudible. Order is power too, she said. I never saw it that way. There was a pause after that, a strange one, the kind that doesn't ask for anything. The waiter needed only a glance to bring in other coffee. Outside, taxis painted yellow lines over wet asphalt. She didn't ask for forgiveness. And I didn't look for that word like someone searching for his name on a plaque. We talked about work, about how the market devours its own at a bureaucratic pace, about how families resemble small apartments with insufficient light. We spoke like 2 old neighbors who ran into each other in the building's laundry room. Before standing up, she placed an envelope on the table. Our apartment in Morningside, she said. I sold it. You're entitled to a share. I looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. It was a clean gesture. As she stood, she said the door, and stopped, as if the word needed permission to leave her mouth. The door's there, Christopher. To come in, or to go out. Right then I knew the circle wouldn't close with a bang. That revenge, the one I'd fed so carefully for years, would take the shape of a phrase returned like a collector's coin. I followed her outside. We walked to the corner. Rain began to draw its dots in the air again. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a wrinkled subway ticket. Haven't used one of these in years, she said, half a joke. We looked at each other. I felt that vertigo that comes from places repeating themselves. And then, in the quiet voice you use when talking to your own exhaustion, I returned her coin. The door's there. I didn't spit it out, I set it gently on the table of time. This time, she didn't smile. There was no dinner. No hug. No reconciliation neatly packaged for someone else's imagination. There was, instead, an understanding. We were both owners of the decisions that had carried us to that intersection. She, with her way of moving through the world. Me, with my way of building it quietly. Micah, a few blocks away, with his heart reminding him he wasn't invincible. And New York, turning on its axis, as if all of this were just a whisper beneath a bridge. I walked part of the way back to Queens, then took the subway, because this city makes more sense when you cross it on foot and for $2.90. I climbed the stairs of my building and, before unlocking the door, stood still on the landing, listening. The neighbor's TV murmured about a Knicks game. A baby upstairs cried in that steady rhythm that sometimes becomes a metronome. The boiler hummed. I thought of Koji, a sleeping creature, a faithful dog that doesn't bark. I thought about how many decisions we make just to keep things appearing unchanged. And how often a random phrase becomes a key. I never worked with Win and Hart again. Never slammed the door, but never left it wide open either. Sometimes emails arrive from someone new on their team, asking about a possible integration. I answer politely, we can explore it. Sometimes they never write back. Sometimes we move a few steps forward, then stop. The market doesn't forgive fragility, it simply forgets it. That's its purest cruelty. Micah returned to the stage, less athletic, more measured. Grace moved like someone adjusting a lamp without changing the bulb, just shifting the angle. They carried on. So did I. In the apartment, the light comes in late in the day, as if it were traveling through the other side of a tunnel. On the round table, almost always clean, I leave an open notebook. I jot things down in pencil. Sometimes just sentences, there is no perfect train, only possible stations. Other times, technical notes that won't matter to me tomorrow. I cook pasta with garlic, turn off the heat just before it's done, as if to remind myself there's still room to adjust. Sometimes I carry my cup to the window and watch Queensboro in the distance, shining like a cheap promise. My hands don't tremble anymore. Revenge once surprised my life, yes, but it lost its appetite along the way. What remained was the quiet melancholy of someone who once lived afraid, and now knows he doesn't want to be that man again. I suppose what I'm saying is a confession. If I'm recording it, it's because, at a certain age, you realize you don't need an audience, just the listener we all carry inside, the one who starts asking questions at the cruelest hour of the night. I don't mean this as a lesson. What I have is an image. A hotel lobby under amber lights. A woman pointing toward a door like she's pointing toward fate. A man walking away. A city unmoved. An empty studio filled with the hum of pipes. An imaginary dog asleep at my feet. A stranger's heart pounding against its cage. A phrase returning, years later, with a softened voice, no vengeance in its teeth, just enough edge to cut an old rope. What I learned is less heroic than I once hoped to tell. That sometimes the most human act is to persist quietly. That order can be a kind of tenderness toward oneself. That intelligence, without kindness, isn't enough to keep you from harm. And that the door, the damn door, isn't a fixed exit or entrance. It's a frame. What changes is the direction of our steps. I, at last, chose mine. And when she heard the phrase she'd once driven into me like a thorn, I didn't use it to wound her, but to release her. To release myself. The door's there, I whispered, almost gently. And for the first time, I crossed through it, inward.